They told us we were going to Egypt to advise, nothing more. In 1970, during the War of Attrition, I was a 23-year-old Soviet naval advisor stationed near Suez, officially invisible, officially denied. What they never told us was what lived beneath the Nile's dark water. Fishermen whispered its name in fear, Al-Kirsh Al-Azim, the great shark. Our reports were classified, the evidence destroyed, and the survivors silenced. I'm old now, but some truths refuse to stay buried. Welcome to Combat Lore Files, where the shadows of war live on. Hit subscribe and get nightly drops of stories like this. They say soldiers leave ghosts behind in war zones, but what if the ghosts were already there, waiting for us? I remember the heat first. Egypt in July 1970 felt like standing inside an oven with the door closed. Our transport truck rattled down a dust-choked road toward Lake Timsah, south of Ismailia, where the Suez Canal carved through the desert like an open wound. I was Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov, no relation to my commander, just an unfortunate coincidence, 23 years old, trained in naval operations at Sevastopol, and now a technical advisor to the Egyptian Navy. That's what our papers said. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. We were Soviet ghosts, operating in a war our government officially denied we were fighting. There were 12 of us in that truck, all naval specialists. We wore Egyptian uniforms without insignia, carried weapons with filed-off serial numbers, and had been briefed to speak only Russian among ourselves. If we died, Moscow would deny we existed. The War of Attrition had been grinding along the canal for 3 years. Artillery duels, air raids, commando strikes. The Egyptians and Israelis were bleeding each other dry, and we were there to tip the scales. Our base was a collection of camouflaged bunkers and pontoon docks hidden among the reeds at the canal's edge. The water stretched before us, murky green-brown, reflecting the white sun like hammered bronze. Israeli positions sat just 8 kilometers across on the opposite bank. At night, you could see their searchlights sweeping the darkness, probing for targets. Major Volkov, my commander, a grizzled veteran of the Pacific Fleet, gathered us in the briefing bunker that first evening. The air inside was thick with cigarette smoke and the chemical stink of insect repellent. Our mission is straightforward, he said, tapping a map with his cigarette. Train Egyptian combat divers. Secure supply routes. Maintain operational security. His eyes, hard as flint, swept over us. The Israelis have submarines, frogmen, sabotage units. Stay alert. But it was what he didn't say that stuck with me. As we filed out, I noticed the Egyptian liaison officer, a captain named Rashid, speaking quietly with one of the local guides, an old fisherman with sun-darkened skin and eyes that had seen too much. The fisherman kept shaking his head, gesturing toward the water with something that looked like fear. That night I couldn't sleep. The heat was suffocating inside our quarters, so I walked down to the dock. The Nile fed into the canal here, and the water moved with a sluggish current that seemed almost alive. I lit a cigarette and stared out at the darkness. Somewhere across the water, an Israeli patrol was probably doing the same thing. Then I heard it. A sound like something massive breaking the surface, a wet exhalation that echoed across the water. I froze, scanning the darkness, but saw nothing. Just the night, thick and impenetrable. When I asked the sentry if he'd heard it, he crossed himself. An orthodox gesture I hadn't seen in years, and said, "The fishermen won't go out after dark anymore, sir. They say something's hunting in the deep water." I dismissed it as superstition. War makes people see monsters everywhere. I should have listened. The first rule of naval warfare. When a boat goes silent, it's already too late. The patrol boat was designated Unit 7, a Soviet-made torpedo boat we'd retrofitted for canal operations. 6 Egyptian sailors under the command of a young lieutenant named Hosni, a good kid who spoke broken Russian and dreamed of studying engineering in Moscow after the war. They departed at 2,100 hours for a routine sweep of the southern canal sector, checking for Israeli infiltration teams or sabotage equipment. Standard mission. They were due back by midnight. At 0030 hours, they were officially overdue. At 0100, Major Volkov ordered a search operation. I was part of the rescue team that went out at first light. The morning sun turned the canal into a ribbon of molten gold, beautiful and utterly wrong for what we were about to find. We spread out in 3 boats, following Unit 7's planned route along the eastern bank where reed beds created natural hiding spots. The radio crackled with Egyptian and Russian voices, tense and clipped. It was Sergeant Petrov who spotted the debris first. Floating wreckage scattered across a 100-meter stretch of water, with splinters, a life jacket torn nearly in half, an Egyptian flag, still attached to a piece of decking, soaked in something dark that wasn't water. As we drew closer, the smell hit us. Salt, blood, and something else. Something ancient and rank like low tide in a forgotten harbor. Then we found the boat itself. What remained of Unit 7 had been driven onto a sandbar near the reeds. The hull, reinforced steel plating designed to withstand small arms fire, looked like it had been attacked with a gigantic can opener. Massive puncture marks, each the size of a dinner plate, pierced both sides of the vessel. The deck was buckled inward, metal torn like paper. Blood streaked every surface, already browning in the heat. But there were no bodies. Not one. Major Volkov climbed aboard, his face carved from stone. I followed, my boots sticking to the blood-slicked deck. The boat's radio was smashed, the controls shattered. But what made my breath catch was the bite mark on the stern. A curved indentation, easily 2 meters across, studded with triangular impressions. Each tooth mark was the size of my hand. Sabotage, Volkov said flatly, though his voice lacked conviction. Israeli underwater demolition team. But Captain Rashid, standing in our rescue boat, shook his head slowly. The old fisherman, Hassan, stood beside him, and I saw the Egyptian officer grip the man's shoulder like he needed support. Hassan met my eyes and said in careful Arabic, which Rashid translated, "This is Al-Kirsh Al-Azim, the great shark, the guardian." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to dismiss it as trauma, as the superstition of uneducated men looking for explanations in a brutal war. But I was staring at bite marks that couldn't have come from any weapon I knew, and 6 men had simply vanished into water that was barely 15 meters deep. That night, Moscow sent an encrypted message. Investigate and report. Nothing about rescue. Nothing about recovery. Just data collection as if Hosni and his crew were already statistics. 2 days later, we descended into the Nile with sonar equipment, and the machines heard what we refused to believe. Sometimes the most terrifying sound is the one that shouldn't exist. The hydrophone technician's name was Yuri Chernov, a pale, nervous kid from Leningrad who spoke to machines better than people. He'd brought some of the Soviet Navy's most advanced underwater detection equipment, gear that could hear a submarine's engine from 20 kilometers away, map the ocean floor in complete darkness, and distinguish between a school of fish and a naval mine. Military technology we weren't supposed to have in Egypt, but Moscow was getting nervous. We deployed the hydrophones at dawn, dropping them into the deeper sections where the canal widened and connected with the Nile. The water here ran dark and cold, fed by underground springs and the ancient river system that had sustained civilization for 5,000 years. Yuri worked in concentrated silence, adjusting frequencies and calibrating sensors while the rest of US stood guard, rifles ready, eyes scanning the murky surface. The first readings came through at 0647 hours. I was drinking bitter Turkish coffee when Yuri suddenly went rigid, his headphones pressed tight against his ears. "Sir," he said quietly, "I'm picking up something large, very large." His voice had that particular quality of fear that comes from men who understand exactly what they're seeing and know it's impossible. Major Volkov moved to the equipment station. "Define large. 20 meters minimum. Biological signature, not mechanical. This moving deliberately, sir, not drifting with the current. Hunting patterns. Circling behavior." The major's jaw tightened. "Equipment malfunction. Run a full diagnostic." But I was watching the sonar display, and even with my limited technical knowledge, I could see the contact moving across the screen. A massive shape gliding through water that was supposed to be empty except for fish and the occasional crocodile. It moved with purpose, patrolling a specific area like a sentry guard. And it was big enough to swallow a car. Over the next 6 hours, we tracked it through 3 different sectors. The pattern was undeniable. This thing was territorial, aggressive, and far more intelligent than any fish had a right to be. When smaller boats passed through its zone, it followed them, staying just deep enough to avoid visual detection. When larger vessels appeared, our patrol boats with their armed crews, it vanished into the deeper channels, waiting. That afternoon, the Egyptian divers arrived for training. They were supposed to practice underwater navigation and mine detection. Young men, brave and eager, ready to serve their country. But when Captain Rashid briefed them on the exercise location, 3 immediately refused. They spoke rapidly in Arabic, gesturing at the water with barely concealed terror. Hassan translated for us, his weathered face grim. They've seen the teeth marks on the wrecked boats. They know what made them. They say this is the hunting ground of Al-Kirsh al-Azim, and to enter the water is to offer yourself as sacrifice. Volkov exploded. This is cowardice. We're facing Israeli saboteurs, not fairy tales. But even as he shouted, I saw the doubt in his eyes. We'd all seen those bite marks. We'd all heard the sonar readings. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I stood on the dock at 2,300 hours, smoking my 3rd cigarette, staring at the black water. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the gentle ripples. And then, perhaps 50 meters out, something broke the surface just for a second. A fin, triangular and massive, cutting through the moonlight like a knife blade. Then gone. My cigarette fell from my fingers. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The water settled back to calm, as if nothing had happened. But I knew what I'd seen. And more terrifying, I knew it had wanted me to see it. The attacks escalated. Within a week, we'd lost 3 more boats and 14 men, and the high command could no longer pretend we were fighting an ordinary enemy. When hunters become the hunted, the first casualty is always confidence. The order came through on July 23rd, encrypted and direct from Soviet Naval Command in Sevastopol. Eliminate the threat by any means necessary. No restrictions on weapons or methods. No public acknowledgement of the operation. The message ended with a phrase that made my blood run cold. Asset must be neutralized before it becomes a strategic embarrassment. They weren't worried about our lives. They were worried about what it meant if a Soviet naval contingent couldn't handle one oversized fish. Major Volkov assembled our kill team in the weapons bunker. 8 Soviet specialists and 12 Egyptian volunteers who were either very brave or very foolish. The arsenal he'd requisitioned would have been enough to sink a destroyer. RBU 6000 depth charge launchers, underwater explosive devices with proximity fuses, harpoon guns loaded with explosive tips, and something I'd never seen before, a prototype acoustic weapon designed to rupture a submarine's hull from the inside. Hassan watched our preparations with the resigned sadness of a man watching children play with matches near gasoline. Captain Rashid had insisted he come along as a guide, someone who knew the Nile's depths and currents. The old fisherman approached me while I was checking my diving gear, his calloused hand gripping my arm. You don't understand what you're hunting, he said in broken Russian. This is not animal. This is guardian. When Napoleon came with his guns, it appeared. When the British came with their warships, it appeared. Always when foreign blood spills in sacred water, it wakes. It's just a shark, I said, not believing my own words. A big one, maybe a freak of nature, but still just an animal. Hassan's eyes held ancient sorrow. Then why does it choose its targets? Why does it attack only military boats? Why does it circle but not strike until the moment of greatest fear? He released my arm. You hunt something that has been hunting your kind for thousands of years. You will learn the difference. We departed at dusk. 3 boats in tight formation, bristling with weapons, sonar pinging constantly. The water had gone still, unnaturally so. No birds circled overhead. Even the insects had gone silent. The heat pressed down like a physical weight, and the air smelled of decay and copper. Yuri's sonar picked up the contact at 1847 hours, 300 meters ahead and closing. It's coming toward us, he reported, voice climbing an octave. Deliberately. It's not running. It's approaching. Battle stations, Volkov ordered. All weapons armed. The water ahead began to churn. Something massive was rising from the depths, displacing tons of water as it ascended. Men gripped their weapons, fingers white-knuckled on triggers. The sonar's ping grew frantic, overlapping echoes painting a picture of something enormous and terrifyingly fast. Contact at 50 meters. Depth charge is ready. I see movement, port side, then everything happened at once. The creature hit us from below with the force of an artillery shell. Our boat lurched 45 degrees, throwing men into the water. I grabbed a railing as the deck tilted, heard screams and splashes, saw Yuri's equipment crash into the canal. The impact sound was like a car crash underwater, metal shrieking, with splintering, the deep boom of something huge and furious making its presence known. For one heartbeat, I saw it clearly through the churning water. A gray-black shape the size of a freight car, its body thick and powerful, ancient beyond comprehension. Then it rolled, and I was falling, hitting the water hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. Underwater, the world became muffled chaos. Bubbles and blood and thrashing bodies. Something huge moved past me. I felt the displacement of water against my skin, felt the terrible wrongness of being in the presence of an apex predator that considered me prey. I kicked frantically for the surface, lungs burning. The impact threw me into the water, and for the first time I saw it clearly, and understood we'd been hunting something that belonged in nightmares, not nature. There are moments in war when you realize you're standing in the wrong timeline, facing something history forgot to bury. The water was warmer than it should have been, thick with silt and the metallic taste of blood. My diving mask had been knocked askew during the fall, and one lens had cracked, distorting my vision into fragments of light and shadow. I kicked upward, instinct screaming for air, for surface, for survival. But something made me stop. Some primal warning, old as the reptile brain, telling me that surfacing now would be swimming directly into the jaws of death. I hung suspended in the murky water, 5 meters down, and that's when I saw it properly for the first time. It emerged from the darkness below like a nightmare taking physical form. The creature was colossal, easily 20 meters from nose to tail, its body thick and muscular, built like a torpedo designed by a malevolent god. The skin was rough, scarred, the gray-black color of deep ocean predators. But it was the head that stopped my heart. The snout was blunt, powerful, built for ramming. And the mouth. God help me, the mouth was a cavern of serrated death, rows upon rows of triangular teeth, each the size of my hand, designed to tear through flesh and bone like they were wet paper. The eye found me. It was the size of a dinner plate, black and utterly alien, yet somehow intelligent. Not the blank stare of a fish, but something calculating. Something that was evaluating me, deciding whether I was worth the effort to kill. In that eye, I saw geological time, millions of years of perfect predation, evolution's greatest success story, a creature that had ruled the ancient oceans when our ancestors were still learning to walk upright. Megalodon. The word surfaced in my mind like a bubble from the deep. The monster from paleontology textbooks, supposedly extinct for 2 million years. But here it was, very much alive, circling me with the leisurely confidence of something that knew it was the apex of the food chain. Around me, the water filled with horrible sounds, the muffled screams of drowning men, the metallic clang of equipment sinking, the rhythmic beating of the creature's tail as it moved through its domain. I saw other divers thrashing, panic destroying their training. One man kicked desperately for the surface. The Megalodon moved with shocking speed, its massive body accelerating in a heartbeat. The jaws opened, 2 meters wide, maybe more, and closed around him with hydraulic finality. The water turned red. The screaming stopped. I didn't move, couldn't move. Terror had frozen every muscle. The creature swam past me again, so close I could have touched it, its rough skin creating a current that spun me slowly in the water. It was studying me, I realized. Not hunting, evaluating. Like it was trying to understand what we were, why we were here, what threat we posed to its territory. Then its tail swept forward, the movement casual but devastating. The force caught me across the chest, drove the air from my lungs, sent me tumbling through the water like a leaf in a storm. I had one moment of absolute clarity. This is how I die, in a secret war, killed by something that shouldn't exist, and no one will ever know. But hands grabbed me, strong hands. I felt myself being dragged upward, saw the light of the surface growing brighter. We broke through together. Sergeant Petrov had pulled me up, his face pale beneath his tan. Other hands hauled us both onto a rescue boat, and I collapsed on the deck, vomiting water and fear. "Get us out of here!" someone was screaming. "Go, go, go!" The engines roared to life. I rolled over in time to see the creature breach. 50 tons of prehistoric death launching itself completely out of the water, its massive body arcing through the air, water cascading off its scarred hide. For one impossible moment, it hung suspended against the evening sky, backlit by the setting sun, a vision of raw power from an era when monsters were real. Then it crashed back down, the impact sending a wave that scattered our boats like toys. We fled, our formation shattered, leaving 3 men dead and our pride in ruins. We retreated in chaos, but Major Volkov was not a man who accepted defeat. He contacted Moscow for authorization to use special measures, and we all knew exactly what that meant. Sometimes the greatest danger isn't the monster you fight. It's the lengths you'll go to destroy it. The authorization came through at 0300 hours, brief and brutal. Tactical deployment approved. Collateral acceptable. Document nothing. The message burned itself after Volkov read it. Special paper that dissolved into ash when exposed to air for more than 60 seconds. I watched it disintegrate in his fingers and knew we'd crossed into territory where normal rules no longer applied. The device they sent us was officially designated as an underwater obstacle clearance charge. But we all knew what it really was. A tactical mine powerful enough to crack a submarine's pressure hull at 50 meters, modified with a proximity fuse that would detonate when something large passed within 20 meters. The explosive yield was classified, but the technician who delivered it warned us to be at least 2 kilometers away when it went off. Hassan found me smoking outside the command bunker that evening. His weathered face looked older, carved deep with worry lines. "You're going to use the bomb," he said. "Not a question." "It's the only way," I replied, though the words tasted like ash. "We can't fight something like that with conventional weapons." "You think violence will solve this?" He shook his head slowly. "For 3,000 years, men have tried to kill Al-Kirsh al-Azim. Pharaohs sent armies. Romans sent ships. The British sent depth charges during their occupation. Always the same result. The guardian survives, and those who attack it learn the price of arrogance. We're not ancient soldiers with spears," I said. "We have technology they couldn't imagine." "Technology?" Hassan laughed, bitter and sad. "The Romans had technology too. So did Napoleon. So did the British. And still the Guardian swims. You know why?" He pointed toward the Nile, dark and mysterious in the moonlight. "Because this is not about strength. This is about territory. This is about respect. You are foreign blood spilling into sacred water during war. You are the pattern it was born to recognize and destroy. But orders were orders. At midnight, we evacuated the nearby villages. 300 Egyptian civilians moved inland on the excuse of military exercises. The truth stayed classified. We were about to turn a section of the Nile into a kill zone, and we couldn't guarantee the blast radius. We deployed the mine at 0230 hours, lowering it into the deepest channel where sonar had consistently tracked the creature's movements. The device sank into darkness, its arming sequence initiated, its mechanical brain programmed with one simple instruction: destroy anything large that comes near. Then we waited. Dawn came, painting the sky purple and gold. Birds returned, circling overhead. The heat built. We monitored the sonar continuously, watching for the telltale signature of something massive moving through the depths. At 1547 hours, contact. The creature was approaching the kill zone, following its usual patrol pattern. My hands were sweating despite the dry heat. Volkov stood rigid, binoculars focused on the water. Every man held his breath. The mine detonated at 1549 hours. The explosion was beyond anything I'd imagined. The water erupted in a geyser of white foam and spray that shot 50 meters into the air. a column of destroyed liquid that seemed to touch the sky. The sound was physical, a deep, chest-crushing boom that echoed across the desert, rattling our bones and sending flocks of birds screaming into the sky. The shock wave rolled across the canal in concentric rings, each wave 2 meters high, crashing against our position with enough force to rock our anchored boats. For 3 heartbeats, the world was nothing but noise and chaos. Then the water rained back down, a deluge that soaked us all, and an eerie silence fell across the canal. Smoke rose from the impact site. Dead fish bobbed to the surface by the hundreds. The water itself looked wounded, discolored and churning with disturbed sediment. "Report," Volkov demanded. Yuri worked his sonar, hands shaking. "No contact. The biological signature is gone, sir. Nothing moving in the target zone. For 3 days we found nothing. No body surfaced, hardly surprising given the massive explosive damage. No sonar contacts. No attacks. Moscow ordered us to destroy all records, dismantle the equipment, prepare for evacuation. We'd succeeded, apparently. The monster was dead." Hassan watched our celebrations with the eyes of a man who'd seen this story before. "You think it's over," he said quietly. "But the Nile has a long memory, and guardians don't die easily." On the 4th night, the Megalodon returned, wounded, enraged, and now targeting us with the focused fury of something that no longer hunted for food, but for revenge. There's a moment in every battle when you realize you're not fighting for victory anymore, you're fighting to make your death matter. The attack came at 0300 hours, when darkness was absolute and most men were deep in exhausted sleep. I was on guard duty, barely awake, my mind still foggy with dreams of home. The first warning was a sound, a low, grinding noise like metal tearing underwater. Then screaming. Then the entire dock lurched sideways, pilings snapping like matchsticks. The Megalodon had come back wounded but not broken. It hit our main dock with the force of a freight train, its massive body ramming the wooden structure with suicidal fury. Men tumbled from their bunks, grabbed weapons, ran into the chaos without understanding what was happening. I saw it clearly in the moonlight. The creature's scarred hide, marked with deep gouges from the explosion, blackened burns across its flanks, but still moving with terrible purpose. It wasn't hunting for food anymore. This was vengeance. All personnel to defensive positions. Volkov's voice cut through the panic. Heavy weapons to the shoreline. Move! We scrambled, dragging machine guns and RPG launchers to positions along the water's edge. The Megalodon had withdrawn after the initial strike, but we could see its fins circling in the deeper water, that triangular blade cutting through the surface like a promise of death. It was pacing, gathering itself for another attack. Hassan appeared beside me, his face pale but determined. "The old ruins," he said urgently. "The Ptolemaic temple foundations 1 kilometer south. Shallow water, stone barriers. It's your only chance. Force it into terrain where its size becomes a weakness." Volkov overheard and made the decision instantly. Fall back to the ruins. Leapfrog retreat, covering fire. Move! We ran through the darkness, carrying what weapons we could, leaving behind everything else. Behind us, the creature attacked again, demolishing our abandoned base with methodical fury. I could hear structures collapsing, metal shrieking, the deep thuds of something massive hammering against our fortifications. It was destroying our position completely, erasing any evidence we'd ever been there. The Ptolemaic ruins sat on a rocky outcrop where an ancient temple had once stood before the Nile swallowed it. Massive stone blocks, covered in hieroglyphics weathered by millennia, created a semicircular barrier in the shallows. We positioned ourselves among the ruins, setting up machine gun nests and explosive charges. The water here was less than 3 meters deep, too shallow for the Megalodon to maneuver easily, we hoped. Dawn came slowly, painting the sky blood red. The creature appeared with the light, its dorsal fin cutting through the canal toward our position. It was moving slower now, injured, exhausted, but driven by something beyond animal instinct. I could see the damage clearly. The explosion had torn chunks from its hide, exposed muscle and bone, left burns that must have been agonizing. But it was still coming. "Hold fire until it commits," Volkov ordered. His voice was steady, but I saw his hands shaking. We'd all accepted that this was likely our last stand. The Megalodon reached the shallow water and didn't stop. It drove itself forward with pure determination, its belly scraping against rocks, its tail thrashing as it forced its massive body into terrain that should have been impossible. Water churned white around it. The sound was nightmarish, the grinding of scales against stone, the deep breathing of something in pain but too furious to care. Then it was among us. Fire. Everything. The world exploded into violence. Machine guns roared, tracer rounds painting the morning with red lines. RPGs streaked across the short distance, detonating against the creature's hide in flowers of fire and smoke. The Megalodon thrashed, its jaws snapping closed on air, on stone, on anything within reach. A man screamed, Petrov, caught by the tail sweep sent flying into the ruins. The creature's mouth opened wider than should have been possible, revealing that cavern of serrated death. I was firing my AK-47 on full automatic, the rifle bucking against my shoulder, empty casings flying. Bullets stitched across the creature's snout, drawing blood but not stopping it. Nothing stopped it. It was beyond pain now, beyond survival instinct, operating on pure hatred for the things that had dared to wound it. Major Volkov stood up from cover, a live grenade in each hand. "For the men we lost," he shouted, and ran straight at the creature's open mouth. "No!" I screamed, but it was too late. Volkov dove between those serrated teeth, disappearing into that throat of death. The jaws snapped shut. For one frozen moment, nothing happened. Then the grenades detonated inside the creature's mouth, and the Megalodon's head simply disintegrated. Internal explosion tearing through flesh and bone, turning the ancient predator inside out. The body thrashed once, twice, then went still. The Nile ran red with blood, thousands of years old, finally spilled on modern weapons. The silence that followed was absolute. We stood among the ruins, weapons smoking, staring at what we'd killed. We pulled what remained of Volkov from the water and buried him in secret. Just another casualty of a war the world would never fully know, and a battle that would never appear in any history book. The hardest truths to accept are the ones we're ordered to forget. The cleanup crews arrived within 48 hours. GRU specialists with cold eyes and thick folders marked top secret. They moved through our camp like surgeons excising a cancer, methodical and thorough. Every photograph, every sonar recording, every piece of physical evidence disappeared into locked cases. The creature's body was dismembered, loaded onto refrigerated trucks, and driven away to some facility that didn't officially exist. They even scraped the blood-stained rocks, removing any trace that the battle had occurred. We were separated immediately. Each survivor was interrogated individually, our stories recorded and compared. Any inconsistencies were noted, questioned, interrogated again. They were looking for lies, but we were all telling the same impossible truth. We'd fought something that shouldn't exist and survived only through sacrifice. On the third day, a colonel from Moscow's Naval Intelligence Division gathered us in a secured room. He spoke for exactly 4 minutes. What occurred here was a classified military operation against Israeli sabotage equipment. Major Volkov died heroically in the line of duty. The other casualties were the result of combat operations. No creature, no Megalodon, no anomaly. Is this understood? We understood. We understood that our careers depended on forgetting, that our pensions required amnesia, that our lives might be forfeit if we insisted on remembering. We signed documents promising silence under penalty of treason. We were given new assignments. I was sent to a submarine base near Vladivostok, about as far from Egypt as the Soviet Union could send me without leaving the country entirely. But Hassan's words haunted me during that long train ride across Asia. The Nile has a long memory. I've spent 50 years thinking about what we found in that ancient water. The scientific implications alone should have revolutionized paleontology. Proof that Megalodon survived, adapted, persisted in isolated waterways while the world assumed it extinct. But science requires evidence, and all evidence was destroyed. The truth was sacrificed to political convenience and operational security. Sometimes I wonder if we were the first to encounter it, or merely the latest in a long line stretching back to pharaohs and Roman centurions. How many classified reports exist in how many governments' archives, all describing the same impossible creature? How many soldiers have taken this secret to their graves? The fishermen along the Nile still tell stories of Al-Kirsh al-Azim. I've read translations of their accounts. They describe a guardian that appears during times of conflict, that attacks those who bring war to the sacred river, that cannot be killed because it is more than flesh and teeth. Perhaps they're right. Perhaps what we fought wasn't just a surviving prehistoric shark, but something the river itself conjured. A physical manifestation of ancient Egypt's defense against foreign invasion. Or perhaps it was exactly what the sonar said. A massive predator, the last of its species, defending its territory with the ferocity of something that knew it was alone. Either way, we learned the hard lesson that our ancestors knew. Some waters are not meant for men of war. Major Volkov was buried with full honors. His real cause of death sealed behind classifications that may never be lifted. The other casualties, Egyptian and Soviet, were listed as combat losses. Officially, they died fighting Israeli forces. Their families received medals and pensions, but never the truth. I think about them often, those young men who died because we insisted on fighting something that should have been left alone. I'm 83 years old now. The Soviet Union is gone. The Cold War is history, and new conflicts rage across the same waters where we fought our secret battle. Sometimes I see news reports about unexplained attacks on ships in the Suez Canal, about military vessels that sink under mysterious circumstances, about Egyptian fishermen who refuse to work certain waters. And I wonder, is it still there? Did we kill the only one, or merely the most aggressive? Do the depths of the Nile still harbor guardians that wake when conquerors come? I'll never know for certain. But I know this: we went to Egypt believing in the supremacy of Soviet technology, in the power of modern weapons, in our ability to dominate nature itself. We left knowing that some legends persist because they're warnings, not fantasies. The Nile still flows, deep and dark, keeping its secrets. And somewhere in those ancient waters, I believe history waits patiently to repeat itself, because men never learn, and monsters never truly die. They just wait in the deep places, patient as geological time, until the next generation of fools arrives with guns and certainty. Hassan was right about everything. Guardians don't die easily. And the greatest danger isn't the monster you fight. It's the arrogance that makes you believe you have the right to fight it at all. War has a way of awakening things best left sleeping. Ancient hatreds, forgotten gods, and creatures that remind us we are not the apex predators we believe ourselves to be. The Megalodon took 17 lives in 3 weeks, but the real horror was how easily we convinced ourselves it didn't exist afterward. Perhaps that's the greatest danger of all. Our willingness to bury truths that don't fit our understanding of the world. This story is inspired by documented wartime reports, blended with folklore, and dramatized for narrative purposes.